Okay, we're back and we're ready to go. So I'm going to hit the go live button and cue us up with a little bit of music. And so here we are.
The Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium presents Transforming Guyana. In each episode, Dr. Blackman and Dr. Lewis will tackle a different area of interest for transforming Guyana.
Well, good morning, colleagues, and welcome to Transforming Guyana Season 3, Episode 5. And today we're going to tackle, I am Dr. Terrence Blackman, Chair and Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York. And let me welcome you once more to Transforming Guyana. As you know, I'm usually joined by my co-host, Dr. David Lewis of Manchester Trade and the Caribbean Policy Consortium. David is on travel duty today, and so he won't be in. And I want to welcome you to a program which is kind of very, very special to me. This program, Baby Bonds, and thinking about how we might build generational wealth in Guyana and how we might ensure sort of every child benefits from our national prosperity. Let me give you a bit of background in terms of why this program has emerged. Some years ago, I wrote a piece about the implementation of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And one of the key elements in the Sovereign Wealth Fund had to do with thinking about how we do intergenerational equity in this moment. And I've been mulling around trying to find sort of really good ideas for this question of generational equity. And in our most recent program, which I note has had, well, maybe not some impact, but a question exploring the universal basic income, which is tied in with the most recent announcement from Guyana that every adult over 18 years old will be given a cash grant of about $100,000. I've had the idea at the back of my head about what do we do about children? What do we do about poor children, children who are born into poor families? And my colleague, Michael Lewis, who participated in the program on the universal basic income, sort of said that the idea you're looking for is something called baby bonds. And he directed me to the new school at the new school here in New York. And in a sense, this is how this program was formed. And I want to say just a bit more. As I thought about this, now this is a purely sort of Guyanese note, I realized that this idea has deep resonance for me, and there was something about it. And I remembered, that a very important aspect of our early Guyanese culture, I was born in 1968, was that, your godparents would give you a bank book where they would kind of put money in this thing for you. And, whenever your birthday rolled around or whenever something rolled around, you would then go and withdraw this money and use it in whatever way you thought was appropriate. Outside of that, we have these things where, older people would, give the children a little piece of gold jewelry and have it kind of saved for them over a period of time. And so in a sense, this idea that I want to introduce today, baby bonds, is not completely outside of the realm of the thinking that is traditionally a part of sort of the broad Guyanese culture. Let me just say two more things before I take advantage of the expertise that is here today. So I took a peek at the Guyana Business Journal. I wanted to get a sense of how widespread our program was and how widespread our audience was. And I took a peek at the location demographics for the Guyana Business Journal LinkedIn page. And so I just wanted to say thank you to all of these folks. I mean, so we have folks who have looked in or clicked in on this program from Malaysia, from San Francisco, from Fort Wayne, from Greater Victoria, the Charlotte metro area, Yantai in China, Seattle, the Oxford area in the UK, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Shenzhen in China, Sao Paulo in Brazil, Boise, Idaho, Vienna, Angola, Kanayanu, India, Boa Vista, Brazil, Mississauga, Canada, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, we sort of expect, Aberdeen, Scotland, Toronto, London, the Atlanta metro area, the New York metro area, obviously Washington, D.C., and most importantly, Georgetown, Guyana. So, you know, if you're one of these folks, I want to just welcome you to the program, and I hope that the discussion that you will hear today is one that certainly piques your curiosity and your interest. Let me just also set it up, since one of the things we try to do is to have Guyanese, but also to have people who are not Guyanese, so that we can be afforded a kind of perspective from outside. So in that context, I have to introduce the Guyana to our guests, David Ratcliffe and William Darity. So Guyana is a nation at the crossroads. If you don't know, Guyana is a small, resource-rich nation in South America. It's kind of nicely sits at the intersection. It's culturally a part of the Caribbean and geographically a part of South America. Population of a little over 790,000, so it's relatively small. People will argue whether it's 750 or 790, but it's for sure less than 800,000. But it's there's been a long history of socioeconomic challenges and the attendant inequality that adheres to socioeconomic challenges. And most recent, 2015, Guyana discovered oil, and oil in significant proportion. So Guyana is today one of the world's fastest growing economies, and part of what I've been preaching, so to speak, is that there is an opportunity here to reshape the nation's economic landscape and development prospects. And sort of the vision of this program is really an inclusive development, a commitment to equity, a focus on addressing social economic inequities, particularly for marginalized communities. So there's a large indigenous population in Guyana, which lives in the rural areas, which lives in the hinterland areas, and really to think about models for equitable development. And so it's in that context, this partnership, Guyana Business Journal, with experts like you, Professor Darity, and you, David Ratcliffe, is to sort of bring what I perceive as the best practices in economic inclusion, poverty alleviation, and social equity, to kind of, you know, the broad goal as a Guyanese as a member of the Guyanese diaspora, so to speak. You know, my vision is to kind of see Guyana as a kind of beacon of inclusive, sustainable development in both the Caribbean and the Latin American region. And so, to set it up, historic moment where the world's fastest growing economy, over 11 billion barrels of oil have been discovered, projected revenues of billions annually. And really, it's a once in a generation, once in a lifetime of a country opportunity to jump the gap in some substantive way. And so this is where, you know, I've been asking this question, how do we ensure that every single Guyanese child benefits from this national oil wealth, and equitable distribution of resources, long-term wealth building, breaking the cycles of poverty, creating generational opportunity. So that's kind of the thing that is animating our program today. And I wanted to say here for the audience why baby bonds. So wealth inequality, limited access to capital, generational poverty. What's the opportunity? Universal participation, some guaranteed assets, and economic mobility. And I'm jumping ahead, but just to sketch, what you'll talk about, sort of a government-funded, say, savings account that grows over time, that provides access to capital at maturity and an opportunity to utilize that capital for education, for business creation, for home ownership, for asset building. And now for the audience, I hope that they will be able to, get some context from you about baby bonds, what they are, what their logic is, sort of lessons from the experiences that you've had, and then to think through like what a path forward for development might look like. And then finally, let me say for the folks who are here, Dr. William Darity, who's joining us, is the Samuel DuBois Cook Distinguished Professor of Public Policy at Duke University, where he serves as a professor in the Sanford School of Public Policy, the Department of African and African American Studies, and the Department of Economics. He's a preeminent scholar in the field of wealth inequality, and Dr. Darity is a leading expert on this idea of baby bonds and an advocate for policies that address racial economic disparities. He's an affiliate for the Duke Center for Child and Family Policy and the Duke Initiative for Science and Society, where his work on structural inequality and economic justice continue to shape the national and international discussions on economic equity and policy reform. And so, to reiterate, he is a leading expert on baby bonds and a pioneer in wealth inequality research. And David Ratcliffe is a policy director for the Connecticut State Treasury and an affiliate of the New School Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy. And his work centers on implementing sort of transformative economic policies that address systemic inequalities. Radcliffe is known for his expertise in operationalizing complex programs and his commitment to advancing racial and economic justice at the state level. Certainly his involvement in the Institute reflects his dedication to collaborative efforts that address structural disparities and promote economic equity. So having said that, I want to encourage you to write your questions in, to share your perspectives, and to begin to consider what it might mean for a practical implementation of what we will discuss here in the context of Guyana, and to broadly, focus on how we solve these questions. And then, since I'm probably not going to be able to say this at the end, again, the idea is we're thinking about building a prosperous future for every Guyanese child, and I wanted to make note of the folks who graciously underwrite some aspects of what we do here. Tony Harris, Dr. Michelle Leward, Dr. Nolan Bradshaw, Dimpex, Courtney Allen, and Barbara Roberts. So, colleagues, welcome. It is an absolute pleasure. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I now want to invite you, Dr. Darity, to give us some sense of, what these baby bonds are, and to, broadly help us to help someone from Guyana to understand, what the elements are and what they ought to know, and why this might be a good idea for Guyana to consider. You're muted. Let me try to unmute you. Uh, sorry.
Special thank you, Dr. Blackman, for inviting me to participate in this important conversation. It's very exciting that the nation of Guyana is attempting to mobilize its growing economic prosperity in ways that would provide a greater degree of equity across the population. And it's especially exciting to learn about the interest in the baby bonds proposal. I'll have to say, it's sometimes difficult to explain the baby bonds proposal in the United States. So I don't think that there's any real significant difference in terms of the kinds of issues that might arise in thinking about it in the Guyanese context. When we first developed the original version of the baby bonds proposal toward the end of the first decade of the 21st century, our motivation was the perception that the Obama administration was extremely timid about implementing policies that were designed specifically to improve the condition of Black Americans. And in fact, the only significant Black-specific program introduced under Obama's presidency was My Brother's Keeper, a project unfortunately based upon the premises of Black male dysfunction and Black family pathology. So to avoid the problem of not designing a program that would be seriously considered by the Obama administration, we sought to design a plan intended for all Americans, what can be described as a universal program rather than a Black-specific program, but a universal program that might have a disproportionate benefit for Black Americans, a disproportionate benefit sufficient to bridge certain types of disparities that exist between Black and white families in the United States. So baby bonds specifically constitute a policy to provide each newborn infant in the United States with a publicly financed trust account that can be accessed after they reach the age of majority, whether it's 18 years of age or slightly older. The amount of each trust account is calibrated on the basis of their family's wealth position. Now, the wealth target in the early version of the baby bonds plan, and this is critical, was set at the national median, resulting in a scheme where children whose families at the richest end of the wealth scale would receive a token sum of $50 or $100, while children from the most wealth-poor families would receive a sum of $50,000 to $60,000 in their trust account. Now, because the typical Black family has about 15 cents for every dollar of net worth held by the typical white family in the United States, the average Black child will receive a larger trust account than the average white child, hence the disproportionate benefit from a universal program. And this policy is sharply distinct from child savings accounts, which have been attempted in numerous locations in the United States, but also were attempted for a period of about a decade in the UK. While both types of programs are in principle universal, CSAs, or child savings accounts, usually give all eligible children an identical sum of money. Baby bonds are universal, but they are not uniform in payouts. The sums under baby bonds generally significantly larger than CSAs for children from families experiencing wealth poverty, because baby bonds target the median level of wealth. With baby bonds, families and others cannot contribute directly to the accounts. And finally, unlike child savings accounts, baby bonds guarantee recipients a fixed real rate of interest, at least 1%, over the course of the life cycle between birth and young adulthood. Growing efforts to establish baby bonds in the United States at the state or municipal level also depart from the original structure. Generally, these initiatives are uniform, paying each child exactly the same amount, but they are not universal. Customarily, they are means tested. For example, the Connecticut program, which I'm sure you'll hear more about from Dr. Radcliffe, the Connecticut program is limited to children whose families are Medicaid eligible. The California program that has been proposed focuses on children who are orphaned by the pandemic. Again, the amounts are considerably smaller in the state and local plans since they do not target wealth inequality per se. Local level baby bonds usually do not prohibit contributions from relatives, nor do they guarantee a fixed interest rate on the accounts. Senator Cory Booker has introduced a national program for the United States called Opportunity Accounts. It's very similar to the early baby bonds proposal, except for determining the amounts for each child's account. Booker's proposed legislation deposits an initial $1,000 in each infant's trust account, followed by variable amounts annually until young adulthood, where the annual amounts are gauged by their family's income rather than family wealth. And I think this is noteworthy in the Guyanese context because there's been superb work done by Colin Constantine on income inequality in Guyana, but I'm not aware of any systematic analysis of wealth inequality in Guyana. So if a baby bonds proposal was to be developed in Guyana that was consistent with the initial or original form of the baby bonds proposal in the United States, it would require the acquisition of data on the wealth position of the Guyanese population. Now, the Booker plan focuses on income instead of net worth because given the nature of the U.S. tax system, it's easier to calculate family income than family wealth. The strategy of providing variable payments to each recipient on a yearly basis is quite clever. It's a clever modification of the original baby bonds plan because it reduces the effectiveness of parents engaging in the manipulation of their resources to ensure the largest one-time payment to their child during their birth year. A newly proposed plan in Denmark is another under consideration, influenced directly by the original idea of baby bonds. A Green Party member of the Danish parliament, Christina Olemenko, wrote to me in September 2024 to discuss the Netherlands legislation. It differs from the original baby bonds proposal because it aims to provide a significant asset directly to young adults rather than infants. And indeed, if we are more concerned about childhood poverty, it may be more effective to provide these trust accounts to young adults, young parents. The Dutch proposal will give all persons 13,400 euros, currently the equivalent of about 14,606 US dollars at age 25. Frequently, proponents of baby bonds contend it's a universal program that will close the racial wealth gap in the United States. It could potentially accomplish that goal again if black-white net worth inequality is measured at the median after a generation of recipients receive the trust accounts. However, if the difference is measured at the mean, the original version of the baby bonds plan will not come close to bridging the racial wealth gap. And I would argue that the gap should be measured at the mean rather than the median. Most discussions of economic inequality tend to focus on the median because the middle values in a distribution are uncontaminated by outliers and are assumed to be more representative of the typical experience of members of each group. But in this case, I contend that the mean gap is more relevant. The ferocious degree of concentration of wealth in the United States means that 97% of the wealth held by all white Americans is possessed by white households with a net worth greater than the median white household. So a focus on the median rather than the mean takes virtually all white wealth out of consideration for equality. Furthermore, the gap at the mean is not solely due to the presence of a small number of extraordinarily rich white billionaires. 1/4 of white households in the United States have a median net worth in excess of $1 million, a circumstance that is true for only 4% of Black households. In addition, members of the white working class have 2 to 3 times the wealth of members of the Black professional class. Now, on the other hand, if the baby bonds plan was modified to target the mean, it could, over the span of a generation, function as a universal program that erased the racial wealth gap. This would require a substantial increase in the program's expenses, which would be 8 to 10 times larger per annum. So baby bonds are a powerful avenue towards mitigating the excesses of wealth inequality in the United States. While potentially transformative in its effects, its impact should not be overstated. As currently designed, no existing baby bonds plan at any level of government will eliminate the racial wealth gap. That will require a reparations plan for Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States. So baby bonds must be viewed as a complement for reparations, not a substitute, and a complement that probably is easier to have adopted in the United States than a reparations plan.
No, I want to thank you for that, and I would say that certainly the results of last of the 5th of November would make that certainly makes that much more difficult to accomplish. But actually, one. So what I will do first is ask David to give us some sense of. So I noted some further detail of what was sort of kind of introduced in the context of Connecticut. So give us your sense of where this goes, and then we'll have a kind of larger conversation. I have a few questions, and there are already 1 or 2 questions that are popping up. So I'm going to add your slides to the. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Blackman, and appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And greetings to Dr. Darity. I want to clean up my resume in 2 regards. One, I'm actually not a doctor, but I appreciate the promotion, Dr. Darity. And Dr. Blackman, I previously worked in the Office of Connecticut State Treasurer, where we helped pass the first state-level baby bond effort in the country. And I'll talk about that experience and also the momentum as a result of that victory in other parts of the country, and how it will lead, hopefully, to eventual national legislation, a la the Senator Booker bill. And so currently I work at the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy that was founded by economist Derek Hamilton. He and Dr. Darity wrote this seminal paper, which I'll drop into the chat, on this baby bonds proposal back in 2010. And we're grateful for that scholarship and leadership that just brought us to this moment in this conversation. And so, yes, the baby bonds alone will not close the racial wealth gap, but as an investment among a suite of other investments, could go a long way towards that. Additionally, before I dive into what baby bonds, the experience we've had in Connecticut, we think about what is the purpose of an economy, and if we had a magic wand, what would we have government's role be in the lives of our fellow countrymen? And if we accept that, we are wanting to create a society that promotes human flourishing, where investments in people can support happier, more prosperous, self-directed lives, then that is our North Star. And then within that, you could imagine a range of policy investments, including baby bonds, that can help get us there. Next slide, please.
I'm a bit slow, but
That's all right. So this is a baby, and his name is Nolan. He was born about 1.5 years ago here in Connecticut. And this is not any old baby. This is an especially special baby who is the first baby in the United States born under a state baby bond program. And that's very exciting because since then, 20,000 more babies have been born in this state who are also eligible. Now, a word on Connecticut. We are a state in the northeast corner of the United States, 3.5 million people, per capita, one of the wealthiest in the country, but also has some of the more severe economic and racial segregation in America. And it's incredible to many folks who maybe aren't familiar with our place that nearly 1 out of every 2 births in this state are born into poverty. Think of that. So the wealthiest per capita in the country, yet significant folks who happen to be born into poor conditions. And Nolan happens to be, through no choice or fault of his own, born into that condition. And while we don't know what Nolan's future prospects will be, we know that between the ages of 18 and 30, that he will have access to a trust fund that has been earning interest. Between the ages of 18 and 30, this trust fund that the state has invested, the Connecticut Treasurer's Office, that will be worth between $10,000 and $20,000. And those resources can be used for one of 4 wealth building purposes. So access to debt-free post-secondary experience, investing in or starting a business in this state of Connecticut, purchasing a first home in Connecticut, or putting the proceeds into retirement security. Now, we also know that amount, while not nothing, also is less than what is necessary to put Nolan on that prosperous, self-directed path that I think we all aspire to, and certainly less generous than the federal proposal that Dr. Darity and Dr. Hamilton proposed in their paper some 10 plus years ago. But we also know that this is a significant investment in people in this state, and that we know that without that investment, it's very likely that Nolan and his 15,000 annual baby cohort will likely have a range of outcomes that are less than what his wealthier peers might enjoy. We understand that he would probably have lower health outcomes. He would have less exposure to books and literacy, would start kindergarten behind his peers and not likely catch up. His likelihood of achieving a high school degree is less than wealthier peers. His engagement with the justice system might be higher, in part because of his wealth position. So while baby bonds is not an antidote for any of those things, it can put that young person on a better trajectory and hopefully interrupt that cycle of poverty that he's otherwise born into. And one more word on Nolan, that we don't know his parents or his family dynamics, but we can imagine that because, again, of the poor condition they happen to be born into, or that they happen to live in currently, that no matter how hard they work, no matter what level of education attainment they achieve, no matter how much they love and how much their community loves Nolan, that those efforts of hard work and educational attainment will likely not be enough to cause Nolan to escape generational policy. With that, I'll go into the next slide. So a bit more just to flesh out how baby bonds works in Connecticut. Again, inspired by the national proposal, every baby born into poor conditions receives this meaningful public investment that's deposited into a trust account. At present, it's $3,200 when the baby is born. Enrollment is automatic. So there's nothing that Nolan or his peers need to do. The state invests that money up front, and then over the course of 18 years, invests that with an assumed rate of return of 6.9%, which is akin to what the state employee pension returns are achieving. And again, between the ages of 18 and 30, the child, per legislation, will pursue some sort of financial education, coaching, advising, support, so they can understand the opportunity before them and the choices and trade-offs, and align with their goals in ways that hopefully will have the impact that we desire. Now, the story in Connecticut was interesting. That it was the summer of 2020 when the treasurer I used to work for, Sean Wooden, was trying to understand what could the state treasurer's office do differently beyond the bread and butter of these offices. And most of us don't really think or know much about a state treasurer, but in this country, most states have a state treasurer or comptroller, an agency that helps manage the state cash flow, that issues bonds for construction projects, for example, and also helps manage state employee retirement pensions. After the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, Sean Wooden, our state treasurer, who at the time happened to be the only Black elected state treasurer in America, became familiar with Senator Booker's federal proposal and wondered, could that be reformed in a way that could appeal to the state context, the dynamics at the time, and a desire on the part of advocates, legislative leaders, to do something that could change the trajectory of young people who, again, through no fault of their own, are born into difficult economic circumstances. And with bipartisan support, engagement from the business community, from healthcare, from the faith community, from mayors, Democrat and Republican, it achieved support and eventual funding through the Treasurer Wooden's successor, who was able to identify an elegant funding source to help underwrite what amounted to about $400 million, $50 million a year to support that year's birth cohort. Next slide, please. And since Connecticut passed and funded this legislation, it's one thing to have a really good idea, again, as Dr. Darity and Hamilton conceived, but it's another thing to actually have it take root and happen and be funded in a place. And again, if our goal is eventual federal legislation, we believe as more places and states come on board with Connecticut-style legislation, that will help add wood to the fire, so to speak, of motivating eventual federal legislation. And as you can see on this map of the country, there are 20 places that have either introduced or are seriously considering baby bond legislation. This also includes 7 or 8 demonstration projects, smaller pilots that are in the works, that are testing different design mechanisms that can help understand, for example, the choices young people might make around the eventual distribution, the effect it has on a variety of other domains, including economic position, but also health and well-being, hopefulness, reduction in stress and anxiety, so forth. There's a really incredible pilot, for example, in the state of Georgia that's underway that conceives of alerting a group of 15-year-olds, so not babies, but an older cohort, that in 3 years they will have access to a $40,000 distribution that could be used for wealth building purposes. And then pairing that with guaranteed income, as Dr. Blackman talked about previously. So the power of income, which is typically the engagement that the government, state and federal has with families, essential to help folks get through the day. But this wealth building domain is where we've sort of concentrated our efforts. So to do both, as Georgia pilot is proposing, could be super interesting and help inform the field and drive policy in the state and eventual federal level. Next slide, please. I just have a couple more slides on, so what again will baby bonds accomplish, and why is there this incredible momentum in the country? Well, again, we talk often in this country about the American dream, but for most of us, economic scarcity makes that an unrealistic dream. Baby bonds could, at scale, help Americans afford this American dream and provide freedom. It's economic scarcity that limits not just what's possible in one's life, but actually one's ability to fully engage with society. It can also, you can imagine having resources that converts an idea into a small business, or allows the creative soul to pursue trade school or post-secondary experience to untap otherwise trapped ingenuity, helping build that human capacity and encourage civic engagement in a way that promotes just shared prosperity. The other dynamic that we think could be powerful is that poverty tends to concentrate in place. So you can imagine a cohort of young people who are equally eligible for, again, progressively funded baby bonds that could have this resource deploy into a region for that region's benefit. And importantly, too, we talked earlier about how some want to blame the individual for not working hard enough or for being in that poor economic circumstance. Well, what baby bonds does is reimagines how the system of capital is deployed. And rather than blame the individual, it's actual direct investment in that individual that, again, gives them the freedom of choice and how those resources get deployed. Next slide. And relatedly, so when you think of the role of government at any level, isn't it about managing poor people, right? So it's punitive, it's restrictive, it's this or that hurdle that one has to jump to be eligible for a public benefit that folks are otherwise eligible for. And if we shift that framing to managing poor people, to investing in them, that's a way to think about for places that are considering how to build shared prosperity. That might be a useful framing. But also, I think one of the appealing features of this policy, as we see momentum around the country, is that it's very elegant and very direct. So if the problem is that folks don't have access to capital or access to assets to put them in a stronger wealth position, well, let's provide that, right? And baby bonds does that in a very direct way. And in this country, at least, state treasurers are leading the way, which is a really novel and potentially powerful actor to engage with other decision makers, budget setters, policymakers, advocates, researchers, et cetera, to help move this ball down the field. As Dr. Darity and others mentioned, we're under no illusion that baby bonds alone will save the day. That it is essential that when we think about the life course of one, that Social Security, from birth through old age, is well invested in, and that includes investment in affordable, quality home ownership, early care and education, and all the other investments that help our families and communities tick. And one more slide, I believe. And with that, there's Wee Nolan, and that's Wee Nolan's mother. And for me, reporting, who doesn't love babies, right? And this reminds us again, at the center of our economy, should be Nolan, right? And should be Nolan's mother, and should be each of us on this Zoom video, and those that we love and support. If we remind ourselves at the end of the day that policies are created by people, let's create them in a way that builds that shared prosperity that we all dream of.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll leave the photo up because I think it sharply kind of frames the conversation. I wanted to. I have a colleague named Karen Abrams, and she runs something called STEM Guyana, which is focused on really deepening the engagement with STEM across all demographics. And she's once sort of said, she's once said something to me which I've reflected on, and it just she said, we have to create a situation where if you have a population of 800,000, we have to create a situation where every single child is valuable, and so any child that is not being able to actualize their full potential is a great loss for the society. I think that certainly adheres here, but I think this discussion has really crystallized that for me in this context. And so I wanted to shift us. I wanted to start by asking you, David. What were some of the challenges that faced in Connecticut when this was put on the table in a legislative sense?
That's a great question. It's one that we hear frequently from champions and interested folks from around the country. I think there are three primarily. One is just this framing and this notion of income and wealth, that most, again, of our public policies and investments are focused on helping people survive, get through the day. And this notion that, wealth is a way, if we consider it one of the, if not the most important measures of economic security, that most of our public engagement, investments, policymaking is not in that domain. So helping legislators understand that it's not an either or, it's not income versus wealth, it's not surviving versus thriving, which we think wealth can get us towards, but it's a bundling of those together, and the complementary benefits and superpowers of income wealth, I think, is sort of a narrative framing change that we think was really important to engage with in Connecticut. So that's one. The second is related to this notion of who are the beneficiaries of this. And again, as I mentioned, the history in Connecticut was that after the summer of George Floyd's murder, that there was a real desire to promote state investment for young people left behind, particularly our Black neighbors. And what became evident in the time from sort of idea to having it passed was that the way that this was designed, as Dr. Darity mentioned, it is universal, but it is means tested because of the constraints of state budget. So only those young people who are born under state Medicaid which is sort of a measure of poverty in the state, are eligible. And this is also related to narrative, this notion that there are poor babies who happen to be born in poverty in every city and every town in Connecticut. Even the wealthiest cities have baby bond eligible babies. So that framing was helpful. So legislators and opinion influencers, et cetera, could see that this affects all of us. Although again, there'll be a disproportionate benefit to Black and brown babies. So that's the two. And the third was identifying a funding source, right? So to do this at scale in a meaningful way, where there's a substantial endowment, required some creative thinking on what revenue could help support that. And the Connecticut funding stream, I can get into details later, is a bit unusual, might not be transferable to other places. But what's exciting to hear about the Guyana opportunity is that there may be a really credible, durable funding stream that could underwrite that. So narrative, sort of bipartisan support in terms of this affects all babies, particularly those who happen to be born in poverty, and funding stream, I think, were the three hurdles to overcome.
Could I comment?
Yes, I wanted. Yeah.
So first of all, national governments have an advantage over states and municipalities because national governments are not constrained in their spending by their tax base. And the only constraint on national level expenditure as sovereign currency issuers is the inflation risk that might be engendered by new large sums of expenditures. But baby bonds involves the provision of a trust account to newborn infants that they can't actually deploy or use until they reach young adulthood. So there's no immediate spending impact. And then the impact would be gradual because it's each cohort of recipients that has an opportunity to spend it on an annual basis as they move into the age group where they can access the funds. So there's unlikely to be any significant inflationary effect from a baby bonds proposal, and that's one of its strong advantages. But the other thing I want to emphasize is that the decision over whether or not to anchor baby bonds on income or on wealth is an important one.
I'm glad you.
I'm perfectly happy with the proposal that anchors it on income because I think that's an improvement in terms of the opportunities and economic security for young people who receive those kinds of resources. But I must note that wealth is more significant in terms of understanding economic security and opportunity than income, because wealth gives you the opportunity to substitute for lost income, whether it's an income loss that's attributable to joblessness or some medical emergency or the like. Wealth provides you with the opportunity to access high amenity neighborhoods and to provide high quality, to ensure that your kids get high quality schooling, and at the advanced level of schooling can emerge debt free. Higher levels of wealth permit you to participate more fully in the political system in a country like the United States, where money talks in electoral politics. And higher levels of wealth permit you to provide greater security for your family in encounters with the criminal legal system. And finally, I would mention that wealth provides you with the opportunity to provide more resources for subsequent generations that would not be available to parents or households who don't have comparable levels of net worth. So I think that's a really important dimension of the conversation, is whether or not, if Guyana is going to pursue this, whether or not the anchor should be on income or wealth. And I would prefer the Booker policy or program to be anchored on wealth rather than income, but we would also have to improve our ways of accessing information about household wealth to implement a program of that type.
So I should say, Colin Constantine is someone whose work I'm familiar with, and he has actually been a guest on the program at some point, and I will certainly reach out to him on this question of his work versus, because I do think that his work focused on income.
That's right, it does.
And so I'll definitely reach out to him. So I wanted to, in this vein, can I ask you one more question in this vein? So you talked about the sort of guaranteed interest rate and sort of the fixed real rate of 1% over the period, and I was thinking, could you just kind of elaborate on that? And I'm trying to think, like, what would that look like in the context of a Guyanese, in the context of something that is originated in Guyana?
So the idea is that the value of the account would increase by at least 1% above the inflation rate that's prevailing in a given year. So, for example, if Guyana was experiencing a 6% inflation rate in the first year after the first cohort of recipients get their trust account, the trust account's value would increase by 5%. I'm sorry, what did I say? Did I say experiencing a 4% rate of inflation? Yeah. So the trust account's value would increase by 5%. Yeah.
So understood. Now, a second sort of technical question: is there any thought? Has there been thought given? So it starts with someone who is born on January 1, 2025. Has there been any thought of a kind of baby bond-like idea, which then, say, captures, that goes backward, that goes to, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, and so on, with some diminishing scale? But what happens there? Or is this just something that starts in a very rigid way with a particular cohort and goes forward, and there's no sense of, I was thinking about the Guyanese context in which the announcement has been to give, whatever the U.S. equivalent of 100,000 Guyanese dollars to individuals 18 and above, right. And so there are 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and so on, who are sitting in circumstances. I mean, they're even, in a country like Guyana, one finds, for example, parents who are, well, not just Guyana, but parents who are under the age of 18. If we are going to make something that's cohesive, then it seems to me that somehow you want to do that. And I'm wondering whether or not there are any kind of technical addenda to the baby bonds logic that kind of grandfathers in the already existing folks, or is it something that just starts and moves forward?
I think
so, for example, what happened in Connecticut?
Yeah, I think it's adaptable. I think it can be designed in ways in which it's more inclusive. I think that we've typically thought about this in a way in which we've treated the newborn infants and young people who are older as polar categories for this type of intervention. But so as David Ratcliffe pointed out, in Georgia they have a program that's focused on people who are 15 years of age. The proposal for Denmark is one that involves folks who are 18 years of age and above. And then the original baby bonds proposal, of course, is for newborn infants. And people have largely treated these as kind of discrete opportunities, but they don't necessarily have to be. We can give thought to ways in which we could provide asset building opportunities for young people at different ages. I think that the reason we focused initially on infants was because of the innocence factor, which is that nobody could claim that newborn infants bore any responsibility for their own financial circumstances.
I would add, in the Connecticut situation, it all came down to resource constraints, that if resources weren't a question, then certainly one could go backwards and bring along other young people. Additionally, one advantage of investing in babies is that it allows the market to, in the Treasurer's office, to invest those resources to grow over time. So the smaller, like $3,200 taken to Connecticut, would get bigger. But again, if resources weren't a question, one could fund older young people where that wouldn't be an issue. And there's young Nolan, it so happens he has a couple of older siblings who, just because of when they were born, are not eligible, at least the current design of Connecticut baby bonds. So Nolan will have this resource, but his siblings weren't. So where design can be flexible and resources allow, it makes all the sense in the world to do as much as possible for as many as possible.
I wanted to ask one other question, something which I made a note of. So this is back to the question on wealth versus income, and so I was thinking about data sources for, could you give some guidance on like what sort of data sources should I be kind of orienting folks to in terms of thinking about wealth inequality in Guyana, and then maybe if one could link the sort of data sources to how that might inform the design of the baby bonds in a Guyanese context.
Well, when I was doing some sporadic research about this, I could not find any data on wealth in Guyana, individual or household wealth in Guyana. And when I put wealth in my browser, I got a series of studies that were actually about income differences. So it may be the case that survey information doesn't exist yet, and it may have to be collected for the purposes of thinking about the design of a program that would be anchored on wealth disparities rather than income disparities. And I'll say in the United States, in the 19th century, there was an emphasis on asset building, and it was asset building that was centered on the distribution of land, so that 1.5 million white American families received 160-acre land grants in the Western territories of the United States under the terms of the Homestead Act of 1862. The major asset building initiative in the 20th century has centered on the promotion of home ownership. But apart from that, virtually all American social programs that are intended to enhance the condition of people who have low resources have been income supplement programs. And so it's important to distinguish between thinking about versions of the Baby Bonds project that constitute income supplement programs versus thinking about them as asset building programs. And if you're going to go in the latter direction, or predominantly in the latter direction, then it's important to have information about what the wealth status is of the population.
I just had a thought of, Guyana is an extremely, it's a country with extremely low density, and so I just had a thought of, parceling acres of land off to children when they were born. But I don't think I get that past anyone at this moment. But I like that idea.
Well, never set aside a good idea simply because you don't think anybody will approve of it. I wasn't really particularly aware that people might be talking about baby bonds in a very serious way in 2024. So you come up with a good idea, you hope it will float, but don't put it aside because you just don't think it's politically practicable in the moment.
Gentlemen, I'm mindful of the clock, and I know that it's we've the hour is already. What I want to do is I want to add sort of one question that is sort of here, and kind of use that as a way, if you will, to I know we're on the end, so if you can use that as a way to kind of take 3 minutes or so just to kind of give a broad sort of wrap up. So we'll thank Kayla for that one. So since that's the strategies that are used to gain political and public support in Connecticut, and then how, what's your sense of how that might translate to garner support in Guyana, where citizens might consider, like immediate financial benefit to be a better solution?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, it's similar to the United States and Connecticut that legislators initially were like, "Wow, that sounds great, baby bonds," but folks are struggling today. Rent is unaffordable. Folks are having trouble putting food on the table. Shouldn't we be doing more there? And part of the case making in this state was that it's not an either or, that we can and must address food insecurity and public transportation, all the things that help families get through the day. But if that's all we do, then we will be sitting here 5 and 10 and 20 years from now, wondering if we could have done something different, back in those days that could interrupt and this cycle of poverty. And baby bonds is a way to do that. And strategically, that was initially the governor was like, well, we're doing enough already for home ownership and all those sorts of things. I don't see what's different with baby bonds. And that again took some work around media and also just power building, really, when it comes down to making choices around resources as it relates to policy. The Connecticut treasurer and champions in this state thought a lot about who are the unusual allies who could help with case making and sort of exercise collective muscle in a way to drive this policy forward. So we engage chambers of commerce, we engage hospital systems, and each of these actors, as I mentioned them, have a direct self-interest in having something like baby bonds be successful for their constituents, for current or future workforce, et cetera. Broad interfaith community, community organizations, large employers. All of these actors on their own, you might feel like are unusual bedfellows for this sort of policy. But again, when it's considered in relationship to other investments that the state is already making in families, it's sort of seen as a missing piece. And sort of that storytelling and power building was really key to the Connecticut story.
Thank you. Dr. Darity?
I guess I always thought that this was something that would not be a hard sell, but I'm probably wrong. But I mean, the premise is, the cliche phrase is that in some sense you're attempting to make the playing field more level, and you're trying to give all children who enter into our social world at least some minimum set of resources that can permit them to thrive. And I guess I never have really understood why some people might be very skeptical about a policy of this type. It seems like something that would be endorsed by folks on all sides of the ideological lines.
No, that's certainly the case, and it's one of the reasons that we're exploring this today. So, I know we've come to the end of our hour, and I want to thank you both for this really insightful discussion. We've had some really I've been looking at my WhatsApp texts, and sort of messages have been coming in that are quite, sort of good program. I'm listening. I'm wondering whether any government or consequential political operative in our nation is listening. But I think there are a few of them who are listening. So your message is definitely not falling on deaf ears. And I think what you've made evident is that baby bonds really hold some great promise as a direct and, as a mathematician, I think an elegant solution to kind of providing some economic security and opportunity for young people, regardless of the circumstances under which they're born. And I think as we've explored, it's sort of clear what adopting this policy to Guyana might look like. It certainly would require the consideration of some unique data, which does not seem to exist. And I will definitely make a call to Colin Constantine in this regard. And there could be some more broadly some implementation challenges. So particularly this decision around whether to anchor the program on wealth or income, and really how it might benefit a wider range of young people. So I'm really grateful to you, Dr. Darity, grateful to you, David Radcliffe. I think we've laid some important groundwork for further exploration of this really important dialogue, and that we're sort of on this quest to use this windfall moment to create a more kind of equitable future for all Guyanese citizens. And so I just want to thank you very much for participating here today. Deeply, deeply, deeply appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you.
Okay.
Thank you, colleagues.
Take care.
Take care. Yeah, that was quite good.
See.